I'd just like to begin the event by acknowledging the Gadigal people as traditional owners of the land here. The land of the today and pay my respects to elders past, present, future. So just some housekeeping before we begin. In the event of an emergency, we have two alarms. So the beep beep is just stay on alert or alert, and the whoop whoop is to actually evacuate. So that is not just outside. We just head downstairs, go outside, and there's a park, and that's how evacuation is as well. Bathrooms, if you just go out these doors and to your right, so Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, if you need Wi-Fi, you need a machine, and the service. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wait, what's the short thing?
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful site. Heavily appeals for commenting. Been coming here for many, many years, but it's all changed so dramatically. All the complex here. And they put in a new station entrance there. I wanted to say thank you.
Wayne, I think your PA is not on.
Yeah, it's fun.
How's that?
That's okay. Thank you.
I wanted to say a special thanks to Stephen Craig, who here from quite a bit, and his team at Newcastle who facilitated this event, and also the head of the Energy Mission, who I've been lobbying hard on Stephen's behalf, to get $10 billion to fund his mission. And I think that I'm saying the communications team at CSIRO will facilitate this whole event coming to the and to make it possible. And the CSIRO, in particular, through Stephen's office, to underwrite this event and make the facilities available to us. So, what is Australia Forum? Why did it come about? Well, I think if you aren't all very familiar with it, you'll hear during the course of today just what we're about. But we're trying to provide thought leadership on the big issue called climate change, transition to net zero. Whether we get there by 2050 or not, we'll see. But we're really focused on the role of the ICT sector in participating in and assisting this transformation, because it's quite a very large challenge for the nation. And the question is, why not leave it to the energy sector? Because after all, they're the experts. Sorry, not acceptable. The ICT industry is inevitably, being a horizontal enabler, technology is involved in minute detail through every element of this, and we must not abdicate that responsibility. And so the Pearcey Foundation, with a lot of partners over the last couple of years, has been endeavouring to show the way of the ICT industry playing as a key role and facilitator. We had 7 sessions on Australia 4 last year, and this is the book that we published, and it's all online under the pearcey.org.au. And this is the communique and it's a brief summary of 7 sessions that we had last year, during the course of last year, and we're a bit slow off the mark this year, but we analysed the challenges. Now we're trying to go to the next level. So how do you facilitate meeting those challenges? I mean, there's no magic bullet, there's no simple solutions, but in here we outline some of the key issues that must be addressed. So now we wish to find a way of how we do this, and today is the first attempt at going into the next level of detail of what we must do. And to lead us there is the chairman of the Australia 4 committee and organisation for 2024. May I introduce Dr. Ian Opperman.
Thank you, Wayne. So welcome.
Welcome to the next round of the Australia 4.0 conversation. As Wayne mentioned, we spent last year, or the last 12 months, looking at the issues of transition to net zero from the perspective principally of the role of data and digital. We know that the transition to net zero is going to be a large, complex, expensive, multidisciplinary, multifaceted activity, which will take a very long time. We know that there are debates about issues of sources of energy, baseload, even nuclear power being discussed. The line we're looking to take is the data and digital line. We're looking to see what do we need to do to understand, to think differently about the role of data and digital to enable that transition or to facilitate that transition. We spent the last year bringing together many, many different stakeholders who have a very important role to play in that transition to net zero and tried to help everybody see the world from each other's perspective. Wayne mentioned the communique that was produced earlier this year. We launched it at the Australian Computer Society, so thank you very much to the Australian Computer Society for that. We launched the communique. It said, we believe the problem is in here. It's not infinitely complex. It's very complicated. It's very complex. But we think the problem is in these boundaries, and we think there are some large projects that we could carry out or some activities that we could carry out in a much more united way that would genuinely help us transition to net zero, or at least understand the things that we need to do so those people who have major roles to play in that transition could actually then do so in a more coordinated fashion. This year, and this by year I mean this 12-month period we're running through now, the second half of the Australia 4.0 project, we'll look at some of those projects, some of those activities which are already being undertaken. We have the opportunity today to hear from CSIRO about work they're doing in a smart energy, or building towards a smart energy mission, which does speak to some of the important elements of those projects or those things that we need to do, including developing access to data or building data assets which allow us to better understand and potentially innovate in this space. Over the course of the coming months, we'll also move this event to Canberra in October to talk about the world from the perspective of Engineers Australia, where we'll talk about skills, we'll talk about impact of AI, and we'll talk about other perspectives. We'll move to Melbourne later in October and be hosted by Race for 2030 and look at that transition again from a different perspective. And we'll move throughout the beginning of 2025 and again continue to ask a series of questions, debate similar issues from different perspectives. The overarching intention is to develop a common perspective of how we move forward, be more aligned with each of these major stakeholders so that we all get to see the world a little bit from each other's perspective and hopefully get much, much more focused about what we do, what we enable, what we help to advocate for, and also how we learn from each other as we move towards this complex area. By definition, transition to net zero has never happened. Therefore, by definition, we are discovering ways of doing it as we move along. Clearly not starting from zero. We clearly have a wealth of experience of running existing networks and of innovating in Australia. But the ability for us to work together and to learn from each other as we step into this new world is something that we would all be better served if we had a common perspective and had a common view of how we move forward. The way the events will run is it will always be 10 till 12, followed by sandwich-based networking, which is, you should consider that sandwich-based networking to be part of the agenda, not an optional thing to do. But every single one of these meetings, 10 till 12, and our host will essentially give us their perspective for the first hour of that 10 till 12. Then we'll have a roundtable conversation where we'll ask a similar set of questions, but again, from slightly different perspectives each time. What is the role of the consumer, or how do we make sure the consumer is at the center of this world moving forward? What is the role of data and digital? And how do we ensure we build trust in the community so that it doesn't happen to people, but people actively embrace the change in use of data, the change in issues around control, the change of issues around cybersecurity, and also people feel confident and empowered to make the choices which come from having a much, much more dynamic network. So today we're very, very fortunate to be hosted by CSIRO. As Wayne said, I'm sure many people have been to this building before, the Data 61 building here at Everleigh. It has really been the centre of innovation for quite some time in the ecosystem. And we're going to hear from Stephen Craig and then from Stephen White. We made it simple. Everyone has the same first name from CSIRO this morning, to talk about the perspective of these this big mission, this big approach, tackling a big problem from CSIRO's perspective. We're then going to move into the roundtable conversation proper, where we've asked a couple of people to seed the conversation. But what we'd like to do is to have folks actively participate in the roundtable, and also to make sure that our live audience, folks at the back, and our online audience have an opportunity to ask a few questions. We're using Slido today. It's the QR code is up there on the screen. You should have all received a message with the QR code. And we also have an online member from AER. We've got, let me quickly. We have Lyndall Bubcare online from AER. So hello, Lyndall, if you can just give us a little wave. There we go. Everyone wave back to Lyndall, please. Thank you. This is a very obedient bunch of people. I'm really surprised that anyone ever does anything I ask, but thank you for doing that. So today, we're starting the conversation. It really is intended to be something which we get into it. We get into the next layer of detail and issues. If you haven't seen the communique, it really is worth having a read. There's an online recording of some of the things that we did during the course of last year, but the communique really distills the major issues, these 5 major project areas, and some of the major areas of scoping and domain that we said, the problem is in this space. It's not out there. It's not that infinitely complex, too hard world. It's within a relatively well-constrained domain, and within that scope of complexity, we can start to push really hard in a much more united way. We should all be thinking, what's our role? What do we individually do? What does my organisation do as part of this moving forward to net zero? What does my organisation enable? How do I enable others to do in this transition? What areas can we uniquely understand and therefore advocate for? And increasingly, how can we create a framework where we learn from each other? So with that as context, and without further ado, I am going to hand over to Stephen Craig, who's going to talk about CSIRO's Smart Energy proposed mission. Please welcome Stephen.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Wayne, and welcome everybody. Great to see so many people here in the room, and thanks to Lyndall for joining online from Brisbane. So as Ian mentioned, I'm Stephen Craig. I lead the Smart Energy Initiative at CSIRO. It was developed as part of our missions program, so cross-organisational, cross-disciplinary initiatives based on mission-oriented innovation to address the big challenges of the nation. So what I'd like to do is give you a bit of background to this Smart Energy Initiative, what it's about, where it's come from, why we think it's needed, and then I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. Stephen White, who will give a more technical introduction to this particular area. So Australia's energy challenge, formidable, and it's absolutely foundational for achieving net zero and mitigating climate change. Now, for 2 reasons. The energy sector is the largest source of emissions, and clean energy is an enabler for decarbonisation more broadly across the economy. The numbers here, 2020, 93% of our domestic energy came from fossil fuels, and more than a quarter of our export income came from exporting fossil fuels. And in a few short decades, we have committed to reaching net zero. So this is a formidable integrated systems challenge. It's not about a single energy source. It's all about social questions, environmental questions, engineering questions, economic questions, and indeed digital questions as a part of that integrated systems challenge, and hence the knot that we need to collectively untie and move in a few short years to net zero. So when we think about this energy transformation as a system, from the system perspective, we see that we're moving to a system that's increasingly connected. Now, of course, there's always been connections, but this is becoming increasingly so. It's increasingly dynamic through mainly renewables, but also there are other dynamics in supply chains and industry development and so on. So a connected, dynamic, and increasingly collective system where we're going from a relatively small number of energy generators to a much more distributed, collective system. Now, if we are to operate such a future system in an efficient and equitable way, we have to raise the level of digital maturity in that system. It's simply not possible to run such a complex distributed system in an old-fashioned analog way. So digitalization is an absolute imperative. It's also imperative for us to actually navigate the transformation. So we can't just in one step hit that future state. We have to evolve the system over time and be well informed by data and digital capability to do that in a good way. So we view it as essential just from that system view. If you look at the people view, this system is looking increasingly complex and increasingly unfamiliar. So the structure of the energy system has been pretty constant for a long, long time, and now we're turning it on its head. And of course, energy is just a means to an end. It is the consumers of energy that we are serving. And in this future system, as we know, it's not just that consumers are consuming energy, they're also the owners of energy assets to an increasingly large degree. So the amount of the energy system that's in the hands of mums and dads and small business and so on is growing. So that consumer angle is incredibly important, not just for social license, it's more than that. They actually own the assets in many cases that we want to incorporate in a good way into the system. So where were the gaps? There was one obvious gap we felt when we started working on this, and that the sort of modern system science and engineering that you see in other sectors like aerospace and defence and transportation and indeed communications was being used to a very limited extent to support the energy transformation in Australia. So there is this modern toolbox of science and engineering that can help structure, guide and de-risk these sorts of complex transformations. We weren't using it a lot. There's an opportunity to use it more. So that led to the structure of smart energy with these three interconnected focus areas. Empowerment, this deep societal engagement that we need to shape the future of energy to benefit all Australians. That's led by our social science team. Transformation, the integrated analytical capabilities to guide and de-risk the transition pathways based on this modern system science. And then finally, last but not least, digitalisation, the secure digital intelligence that we need for efficiency and equity, because it's very hard to achieve equity if you're blind and you haven't got the data and you don't know what's going on. So efficiency and equity in future energy system operations. And digitalisation is led by Dr. Carolyn Houston over there from Data 61. So this is a true cross-organisational initiative. The final piece is the National Energy Analysis Centre that we are proposing to establish as a part of this initiative, which will be an open, collaborative national energy data and research centre that prioritise this whole of system approach to the energy transformation. We foresee a number of key parts. The first one, a living lab, so with real people in real homes and businesses across Australia, pre-recruited as an enduring social research capability to inform the decision-making required to move forward. Data Nexus, which is the system, if you like, the rich data and analytical capabilities structured in this modern system science framework, and in a insights platform with data dissemination, visualizations and so on, and innovation networks. So this is very much the National Science Agency as the curator of national research infrastructure, proposing a centre for the benefit of the nation. And I think the Pearcey Foundation and the groups in this room are a great example of the sorts of innovation networks that we have in mind. We've been very lucky as we've developed this concept to be collaborating with the United Kingdom, in particular their Energy Systems Catapult organisation. That also has this whole of system approach to support net zero. They were heavily involved in the energy data and digitalisation task forces. And I spoke to the chair of the Energy Digitalisation Task Force in the UK, Laura Sands. She was out here earlier in the year at the Energy Networks Australia conference, and she kindly recorded a video for this event to share her perspectives on what we are trying to do here. So let me see if I can get that video up.
Really, really important conference today, and very sorry not to be with you in person. But my name is Laura Sands, and I am chair of the UK government's Energy Data and Digitalisation Task Forces. And I've worked very closely with a lot of people in Australia and New Zealand on how we digitalise the energy system. So I just wanted to sort of cover some of the areas that we've been involved with and how and why digitalisation is so important. So I will give you a very few minutes on an overview of where we are. I think we've got to realise that the energy sector is changing dramatically. And we, and certainly in the UK, I would hate to say about Australia, we're probably about 20 to 30 years behind other sectors in terms of digitalisation. But let's sort of understand the sector as a whole and where it's going. Currently, we're spending a lot of time thinking about weather, but it doesn't take price signals. It doesn't follow legislation. What is going to be important in the future is the blending of assets. So it's going to be renewables with storage. And we're going to have to find different ways and different business models that are going to make that happen. In the UK, we've got balancing costs, which are absolutely rocketing. And we really have to start to optimize the system and not just look at it as a consumption model. And customers are going to be incredibly important, as I've seen and heard about in, for example, South Australia, where actually the self-generation is going to be crucial. This is an area of customers that the energy sector is not good at understanding. So in the UK, we are going from about 400 people in the UK who all know each other's golf handicap. I mean, that's how small the energy sector is today. But we are going to 100 million actions and assets, from EV cars through to optimization, new uses of networks, the in many ways sort of layering of different activities on the system, from mobility, self-generation, etc. So 100 million actions and assets needs a very different way of thinking about how to manage the system. So we're going to have new data for trading assets. There's going to be different customer preferences. You're going to have to manage different business models and different in sort of more dynamic and bi-directional system needs. And if anybody, however much I love the energy sector, thinks that this can be done in an analog way, the system will collapse. And I think that we're looking at a very, very increased and in many ways much more accelerated need for digitalization. It cannot be in many ways implemented in a linear way. It's got to be absolutely turbocharged at this moment for you to not suffer system collapse and lack of system resilience. So what does digitalization do for you, both in terms of corporate practice, policy and regulation? Well, as I say, the complexity of the system, it will be absolutely crucial to keeping the lights on. It is essential to get asset visibility to do your strategic planning and to understand whole system costs. Flexibility is going to be multidimensional. There will be layered on different algorithms. You will need to be able to understand and see market signals just in time. That will only be facilitated by digitalization. And markets and consumers, price signals. We talked in the UK about prices to devices, and we're going to have to automate all of those system designs. Currently, very much analog, certainly in the UK. And then we've got operational efficiency, which is going to be crucial. But all of these deliver you lots of other benefits: efficiency and cost reduction, energy security, and regulatory and policy oversight. In the UK, we see that there are really 5, not discrete, interrelated digital tools that we look as being of public interest, not owned by companies, but owned by either the sector as a whole or by government agencies. We need a common customer control and consent. Assets need to be automatically registered. Currently, it's very, very clunky in the UK. Trading platforms are going to have much greater visibility of the demand side, and we need to have, in many ways, a sort of stock exchange type platform. Asset operations, whether that comes down to frequency, issues around storage capacity, etc. And networks most certainly need optimization, and they will need to be digitalized. And in the UK, we're looking at something called a DSO, not a DNO, but a DSO, who will be looking at optimization in localities. And all of this is linked by a digital spine, and that is one of the key pieces of digital assets that are required to actually create what we would call the HTML of energy, allowing for all of these different assets to plug in to create the right protocols for interrelationship and interoperability. The great thing that you should all be very buoyed up about is the energy sector is pretty far behind others. And we are learning a huge amount from other people who've already gone through this journey. And I think that we will absolutely be able to, if we recruit the right people from the sector, we will ensure that there is a lot of understanding and knowledge out there. And we are not starting from sort of, ground zero. We have got a lot to learn from others. And I'm sure that you will be able to recruit the right people from other sectors to, in many ways, speed up your digital transformation. I think that Australia is in an extraordinarily interesting position. I think with all your renewables and all your ambition, this could be a very, very exciting journey. But without digitalization, you will have a system that is much, much less resilient and is going to cause lots of problems going forward. I'm very much open to working much more closely with Australia, and please do contact me. Have a fantastic conference today, and I'm sure I would love to learn much more from you about the learnings that have come through.
Fantastic. So very kind of Laura to record that directly after coming back from holidays, I can say. She jumped straight into it. So that's the UK perspective. And in many ways, they're somewhat ahead of us. Their digital spine reports were just released a couple of weeks ago. So if you're interested, you can find them online. And with that, the UK perspective, I will now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Stephen White, to share some Australian perspectives. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Steve. So yes, my name is Stephen White. I run the energy performance research inside CSIRO, which is all the sort of customer side of the meter, energy efficiency and demand management. I've got a bunch of roles in the International Energy Agency, and we're just getting up Annex 96 on grid integrated control of buildings with around 25 countries and 50 odd organisations involved in that. And if you back in the day, in the early 2000s, I co-led the work with Energy Users Association of Australia, which led to the creation of a company called Energy Response Proprietary Limited. And I wrote the initial business plan for that, and that now has been taken over by Enelex. So lots of stories to tell, scars from arguments mainly lost over the journey since then. But obviously more of a commercial and industrial focus, perhaps more so than residential. I see my role here is setting the scene, and in doing so, there's a bit of electricity industry 101. Forgive me for all those people that have dyed in the wool in the industry and know it already, but hopefully what I'll do is add to that some provocations, if you like, some opinions to kind of get the thought juices running. And being opinions and provocations, they're obviously mine. You can go throw gravel on my roof at night if you don't like them. These are not the considered representation of CSIRO, so don't blame CSIRO. All right. Okay, buckle up. Let's have a run through this. Where else should I start but the consumer? And the consumer's interest in their energy bill. And in the traditional world, they bought electricity and little did they know where it was going. It was going through, that bill was then being divided up into little parcels to a bunch of services. Account management, wholesale, you could break that wholesale down into a bunch of things. Then network, and network you could break down into transmission and distribution and environmental. So it was very much, I'm paying for a service or a group of services. What's new here is that these customers have got a bunch of resources that are flexible. That is, they can sort of turn on and off, or they can modulate in some form or other. That could be electric vehicles, batteries, could be thermal batteries in the form of hot water or air conditioning, could be standby gensets, and of course, solar. And solar has inverters that can be switched off. Probably as a consumer, that's the last one that I want to switch off because I bought that in order to make electricity and stuff. And unfortunately, perhaps those other people there, that's the first thing that they want to turn off. Why is this important? I guess we would see these assets sitting over here as being the cheapest dispatchability available. If they're not the cheapest, then we're not really sitting around the table here. We'd go off and we'd do the same old that we've always done and get the supply industry and all those services to beef up. AEMO in the ISP says that these cheapest dispatchabilities are worth about $4 billion to us compared with trying to do it on the supply side. So it begs the question, if these are the assets that we're calling on, where do they fit? You know, who controls them and how much automation can we get in with our new digital technologies, and how much should we pay? Indeed, I would ask the question, are those loads there, those dispatchable loads, are they still loads or are they a product that is available to sell to someone? And if they're available products to be sold, why are those other people on the right-hand side here not paying more for it? So there's a question here is, show me the money, which every customer would want there. We did a bunch, this is with Race for 2030. We did the opportunity assessment on flexibility and dispatchable control. I led that project and we interviewed 18 commercial and industrial people, and broadly they didn't want to get involved in the complexity of all those supply industry products and services. They wanted it to be easy and trustworthy so that they could make relatively simple decisions to participate. Partly their decision making might be around the money, but it needed to be relevant to them, and often in the environment is a key driver to get it to a board level discussion to participate. And if we're going to participate, make it financially viable, makes sense, but also make it visible to me so that I know that I'm participating and that I'm getting something out of it. And so oops, seem to have somehow or other got out of this. Someone can help me. There we are. And so you may well ask then, if those are the kind of three criteria for a customer to be a consumer energy resource, do we need to mirror all those cost reflective supply industry pricings? Do we need to try and squeeze these resources in and pretend that they're a generator or pretend that they're a network? And do we need all those complex registration, metering and settlement procedures? And so I'll be talking a lot about those kinds of things. And in a number of the forums that I talk about, there's this sort of perception that if we make it good for the aggregator or the retailer, well, really it's their role to go out and talk to the customer, and the benefits will come to the customer of getting it right. A bit like the safety industry, I would say that if you want safety, you make it inherently safety. You don't try and put band-aids over an existing system. And so similarly here, somehow or other, we've got to make this inherently customer-centric if we want to grow this industry to a large scale. So here's my first take-home from a customer perspective. If you want to successfully integrate these customer energy resources into the electricity system, you will probably need to have its own market rather than squeezing it into all these other little boxes. And to be honest, that's how we grew our solar PV industry. We created feed-in tariffs, which were an outside of market tool, and that's how we grew it to start with. All right, let's, even if we did have a market there, we've still got to sort of fit it in, that is orchestrate these resources. And so let me take it now from the DNSP's perspective. And, taking one particular, you may think that I would immediately dive into dynamic operating envelopes, but no, I'll go back into the vault here. This one's going back to 2013, looking at a particular networks area. They had $13.6 billion worth of assets and 5.6 gigawatts of power going through their network. That's worth $2,440 per kVA, I reckon. And then back in 2006, there was a particular network substation that was sort of coming to its limit. So this particular substation had just under 70 MVA of firm capacity, and then the red triangles there show the growth and then the concomitant need for upgrading. And what do we end up with? We end up with a very lumpy market that goes in years, and you can see that if you can defer for 1 year, you've got 0.8 MVA worth deferral value of 440,000, and let's pay the customer $549 per kVA. We can defer for 2 years, that's worth $62 per kVA. There's a good logic behind that. I'm not criticising the logic, but I do point out that it's a trickle of amount of money compared with what the customer is actually paying in the first place. And even worse, probably from a process point of view, the options paper went out on 3rd of August. And if any non-network solution was going to come up with an answer, it had to be in by the 31st of October. 3 months to find these things in that particular substation. Here's an opportunity for digitalisation. What if we had a geospatial map of all the CER assets, and we gathered data on them, and we had the ability to analyse them for suitability without having to go out to a stop-start market? And so I don't see anything different really compared with back in that day where suddenly we ended up with gold plating our network. I think we're quite likely to be in the same situation here because we haven't fundamentally changed the way we view the value of our CER assets. Take home number 2. Dynamic operating envelopes are important, but they still view consumer energy resources as a problem that needs to be switched off, not as an opportunity to switch on. So we need continuous visibility of where these flexibility assets are so that we can engage them. And I can't see too many other ways to get that than also to concomitantly have continuous incremental network price signals, not these sort of now you see it, now you don't lumpy kind of signals. So that's my DNSP view. Let's now switch our attention to the wholesale perspective. And again, there's a bit of nuance to our wholesale perspective. I think the market as an energy-only market has been set up particularly well for economic efficiency when things are going well. That's sort of at the top, and it has reliability services such as RERT and the like there, sort of as your backstop. So it has that continuum. And as a customer, three ways I might likely to participate in that is perhaps through, at the extreme, spot price exposure, which I think talks really well to economic efficiency, and then the wholesale demand response market and the reliability emergency reserve trade, or RERT market, perhaps talking more to reliability services. These are quite different products, if you like, that a customer might be offering. If I'm looking at spot price exposure, then I would need to automate that. I would need machines talking to machines using IoT technology probably to have continuous optimization and modulation. Very much a load shifting type of mindset that needs to be automated. If I'm wholesale demand response and reliability emergency reserve trader, then perhaps I'm a little bit more towards the load shedding end of the spectrum, but it's not either or there. But they are sort of fundamentally different. The load shifting, that's the continuous modulation, I can settle that just through my normal time of use bill, and I would hopefully see that as a reduction on my bill. Big downside here is that I'm still just getting a bill as a customer, and to be honest, I don't even know if I've saved any money because it's just a bill that comes in and I typically just pay it. So the actual behavioural economics, if you like, for that load shifting spot exposure is not real good for large scale adoption. The more reliability oriented actually ends up being quite event based. If I'm doing event based management of my load, then I'm probably settling or getting paid on the basis of a baseline. Now, baseline's got a bit of bad stick under the wholesale demand response market mechanism for being too difficult to do. But the baselining does already exist in a lot of our certificate schemes on the energy savings side. The beauty of comparing my load that I deliver versus a baseline is I get a difference and I can actually measure it and get paid for it. And then I get dollars in the hand. But then if I'm doing that, I've probably got the energy supply industry is probably rightly worried is how reliable or how firm is this stuff if we only see it very occasionally. And so I'll talk a bit more about firmness. So here's your 101 of electricity, the traditional way that we've done our industry. We've had base load generation, high capex, low running low running costs, and it has to run for a long time to get payback. And when the load gets up towards its peak, we bring in open cycle combustion turbines and storage, low run hours, but high cost. And I guess what I'm sort of saying here is that demand response now in the new world has to be more of a thing that needs to be treated separately and additionally from those. And so therefore I put it out to you. Do we want this demand response thing, this flexibility, these consumer energy resources to be actively participating? NERA did a study for AEMC there and actually compared various consumer energy resources or demand response markets in around the world. At the left-hand side, they call it growth-oriented. And these growth-oriented resources, easy to earn upfront money, but few penalties for non-delivery. And so the danger there is you get lots of people piling in, but when you ask for them, they're not there. But you get lots of people, you get lots of presumed capacity. On the other end, you make it really stringent with high barriers to entry and strong penalties. And yeah, you got firmness, but no one really is able to participate. Our wholesale demand response market is probably sitting towards the right-hand side there, and we've got, is it somewhere between 30 and 60 megawatts, which is peanuts there. I would argue we need to actually relax things towards growth-oriented participation, and we need that wholesale demand response mechanism to get a regular amount of testing of our resource to prove up its firmness. So in future, with our renewable energy transition, take home number 3, we need more reliability services to match for the variable renewables. And luckily enough, these consumer energy resources actually fit fairly well using baselining as a methodology to be able to participate. And to be able to do that, I think we're going to have to relax some of the compliance burden on that wholesale demand response mechanism, which forces us to consider firmness here. On the one hand, we know that our supply side generators, our big assets there, are firm. They've got real-time asset telemetry. They've got ruggedized industrial SCADA and the like. So supply is firm because each asset is firm. And if we put flexibility in that bucket, then really we're just calling it a pseudo generator and we're trying to squeeze it into something that it's probably not. On the other side, we've got the demand side or the loads. We just let them do what they like. And then we measure it after the fact as ex post site meter data, and we price it according to time of use tariffs, flat tariffs with demand charges, etc. And the speed of our exchange of information can be as slow as by post through energy bills. But we still consider it firm because in aggregate or statistically, we know that it doesn't go above certain levels. And in the DNSP land, we have this idea of after diversity, maximum demand. So here, flexibility on the load side is a discovered phenomenon there. So there are our two things, but for firmness on the demand side, we need diversity. And here's a bit of a problem. So we've got to take care about removing that diversity. This is a shot from trials done on hot water systems showing the normal demand for hot water on a weekday and on a weekend. That's the green and the red bars lines there. And controlled loads on the hot water system is the blue line. And it shows that if you turn them on, off, all at the same time and then turn them back on all at the same time 2 hours later, you end up with a problem that was worse than the beginning. So diversity or probabilistic or stochastic, whatever word you want to use, is at the core of a digital world understanding and also of the physics here. So probably we need a third way. On the left-hand side, that's that supply side firmness. On the right-hand side, we've got demand side firmness through statistical awareness. And flexible loads, if we're going to squeeze them in, we're going to have to know about them individually. That's going to require Industry 4.0 type connectivity. This is IT connectivity. It's not the ruggedized connectivity of the big industrial power stations. So we've already lost some firmness, if you like, just through the IT mindset that we've got. Because we know them individually, we can request demand response, but to be honest, I don't think that we're going to be able to demand their response in the same way as we do the supply side assets. And probably we're going to pay them ex post, that's after they've done what they've done, but I think we've got to do it on an asset meter because we can't, otherwise the noise in the NIMI meter is a problem. And importantly here, as we go, we learn the behaviour of these assets, we build up a history, we build up a map that the DNSPs know where they are, how they perform, etc., and we end up with a statistical view of the world. In this way, flexibility is firm in aggregate. It's a discovered behaviour similar to a demand side, but we believe it's firm because we've learnt the behaviour. So last couple of slides then in my diatribe here. So are we heading in this direction? And so this slide from AEMO, and Ed's leading the project on the CER data exchange here, has a worldview of a data exchange on behalf of the industry. It's a 3-layer software stack, if you like, there. At the bottom, you've got device-to-device integration. That's the automation that is required, machine to machine. The second layer there is tied with the idea of a customer agent that's got a portfolio of flexible assets and can communicate to those through standards such as CSIRO. And it's the top layer that AEMO is looking at in the research project with ARENA, the CER data exchange. These are where the main B2B actors are sharing information in a digital world. What do you get out of that? You get price transparency, you get access to data, and all of that is required to build trust for consumers. And you get that asset awareness, ideally so that even the DNSPs can see where stuff is inside their network substations. If you get enough people in that world, then they can start to drive interoperability standards so that the cost of transaction is lower. The customer agent there is providing forecasts into the data exchange, and it's managing the return to service and all those practical issues of dealing with the customers. And here then is kind of where I think there is a need. We need this asset baselining. You remember me talking about the wholesale demand response mechanism and things. In order to learn the behavior historically, to get that statistical firmness. If we do that well, I believe there is the potential then to start to allocate flexibility across different actors. Instead of one actor controlling 100% an individual device and claiming it for its own, no, we can share that flexibility across multiple actors. It's all dependent on visibility and transparency there. So last slide then. All very well, Stephen. I'm sure you're all thinking here, this ain't going to happen if we continue to do it device by device. We need what's known in the software world as a network effect. So Facebook, all those social platforms, they would be absolutely worthless and useless to us if our friends weren't on them, if you like. So they're only as good as the extent to which we can populate them with more and more CER assets. And the more they have, the more value the whole system creates. I can understand that if I'm a network service provider, I need big chunks of flexibility. I'm only going to get that if I can see it on a platform at scale. If I'm in the wholesale market, I understand that I need firmness when I'm bidding into a market. I can only get that if I have the statistical sample size, if you like, to bundle it up and make it valuable. If I'm a consumer, I can only really participate if there's a one-stop shop to go to where it makes sense and it shows me the money proportionate to what I'm offering as a product to the industry. And so these are the things that part of what we're thinking. Stephen has shown a whole range of things that we're doing, but these are part of the things that we're looking at in the Smart Energy Mission. And the sort of research questions, what data collection, what sample sizing, what baselining do we need to create the transparency of all those assets, create statistical firmness to enable this CER world to happen? And, you know, as an outcome, I'd love to be able to say that we can begin the idea of value stacking. That is creating more value out of all those services that I showed you at the beginning and offering them to the customer so that we can show them the money. Thank you very much. Yes. I said buckle up.
That was a good warning. Does anyone have any questions for Stephen or Stephen before we move into the conversation? Certainly took away quite a lot from that also. Any questions?
Largely about demand response. What consumers trying to say is that the temporary market being claimed and volatility.
which goes to this slide here. I think it's a both and, not an either or. And I just come at it from a flexibility perspective because that's what I've been focusing on significantly. If I'm looking at economic efficiency services, then absolutely I'm continuously modulating my load to minimise my emissions and to match up my renewables with my load and to minimise my bill in a time of use method. If I'm providing a service, and kind of one of the themes there I wanted to convey was the idea that I'm a consumer, I've actually got a product here that I can offer to you, but gosh, you've got to pay me for my product. I'm not just a load. And if I'm saying I'm a product, then I've got to baseline it, and baselining automatically says that I'm more event driven rather than continuous modulation driven. So I think it's a both and I show it as a continuum rather than as a. Yeah, the question of how much have we progressed since 2004-05 when we were starting up energy response I'll just repeat. I'll go offline and we can talk some more, but I'll repeat what I said around we're still, as far as I can see, we're still considering CER assets as things to switch off and find a regulatory stick that we can use to enable us to do that, rather than can we pay you for your flexibility. And I don't think that's changed a lot. I'll be open if anyone thinks differently there. So perhaps not as much, and hence, are we going to gold plate the network again as load goes up? Is a real.
The historical thing of turning the involved in export. That's turned off. Not where we're at now.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And in terms of where the industry sentiment is, perhaps I would add, I think that's advanced quite a bit. So the Green Building Council of Australia has now got grid resilience credits there, and it's about to launch a leadership challenge and stuff. And so the front end of the industry is actually saying this is a thing that we need to participate in, and we see reasons from an environmental perspective to say there is some sentiment that is going.
All right. I'm not watching the Slido, but most of the room.
Just one quick question. You had the NEHC, you're looking at 1,000 homes as a lab. Are you looking, are you going to acquire those as new sites, or are you going to go to industry and see what you can acquire from existing fleets out there?
So we foresee sort of a recruitment process where people can opt in to be part of this sort of enduring capability. And then there's a second opt-in step to specific trials or specific activities. That's very similar to what they've done in the UK. So they, for the last 3 or so years, they've run a large-scale distributed living lab to support energy innovation. So we're very much learning from that model.
Is that active now?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm just going to turn the room mics back on so that folks online can hear us, and it should mean that we now move into a more approach. Now, if we've got the room mics on, what we're going to do next, so thank you very much, Stephen and Stephen. So, Lauren, thank you very much, Stephen and Stephen, for that appetite meter for what I was saying. There was some main course of some dessert in there. So we now asked 3 people, somewhat not quite random, we asked 3 people to just give some thought-provoking little bits to get our roundtable conversation started. We've got Ed Shand, Colin Christopher, and John Fletcher. Everyone, you know that you're currently doing something. Just ask you to Ed, we'll start with you. Just a few words to begin with, just to get us into this next section.
I might start by providing a bit of
background about myself, because much of my thoughts and where I think things are, it's driven by experience working as a rule maker. So I started life in the energy sector as an energy retail analyst. Back before the day, we had regulated retail pricing, everything was pretty predictable. And then as time moves on, we moved to the competition, retail price deregulation. Fast forward 10, 15 years, I started working at the, actually before I go that, I think Stephen talked about feeding tariff. I was one of the first few people with solar panels has got started, and I was sitting down at a computer trying to calculate what should be the price to home consumers, customers, how much they should be paying for. And I remember saying to my colleagues, this is going to drive a bit of a gold plating exercise coming forward, because you're actually adding quite a significant amount of price for those who won't, or who doesn't want to pay for solar panels. I'll go forward 10, 15 years. I happened to run a rule change with a few colleagues, and Tim was there supporting on the sideline, about how we price network prices for customers who need to export to the grid, because until then it's always been a one-way traffic, you pay usage, but you don't pay. All of that, my thought-provoking question is, we talk a lot about consumer energy resources, consumers as people who would not just buy a product, but now sell a product back into the market. A little bit of a challenge to Stephen's point there is, do consumers actually want to sell a product back into the market? We keep thinking, or keep telling the industry that there is a product that they can sell, but are consumers still in the mindset where they look at the electricity system as something that they need to have, a bit like drinking water? I want to buy water, I want to drink water, I want to plug in my car, and things just work. That's, in my view, primarily still where the majority of customers are looking at the electricity system, electricity services. They haven't quite got to the mindset that, oh, there is something that I can offer back to the system and I'll get paid for it. So I think that's probably our biggest challenge we have. And then there's a whole lot of other sub-issues in there about trust, whether they believe it or not. So I'll leave it there, and happy to discuss the first one at that table.
Thank you, Ed. And just Ed, I'm not sure whether you did actually introduce yourself.
Is it possible to have a microphone? It's very hard to hear up the back here.
Yeah.
Great question. Great question. Hopefully we ask.
Having Mike.
Go to the left. Go to the left.
Okay, I tell you what. So what we will then do is, for the next two little parts, the last
Stand up.
Yes, actually the last Colin and John will come up in turn. But Ed, I'm not sure if you did introduce which organisation you represent.
Hopefully you'd be able to hear better me standing up. So I'm
Lecter.
Lecter?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'm the head of energy advisory at Roundtable, engineering consultancy firm, and I lead a team there that provide advice on a variety of things, primarily on market design, CER integration, which is something that I've been working on for quite a while. And before I joined Donald, I spent nearly 8 years at the Australian Energy Mission as a staff member, rule maker, and most of my time has been working on what started as distributed energy resources integration, now become distributed resource integration. So a lot of scars, baggage, but also a lot of insight on how not far that we have come as industry.
At the risk of repeating yourself, if you could just repeat your major points just so that I'll get with it.
Yeah, so the major point is we talk about consumer energy resources and the consumers. I think Stephen in his presentation talked about how consumers are now not just a an entity that's buying a product on the system, but there's a potential for them to actually sell the product back. My point is, do consumers actually A, want it, and B, realise that they can sell this back? Because for such a long time, it's just been something that's they purchase, something they get from the system, they pay something, just get something in return. But I think technology, CER, will change that. I don't think us as an industry, not just the energy world, but sort of the broader ecosystem now, have able to be able to convince the consumers that there is something for them in selling something back. There's something of value in the system. To me, as a corporate maker, that's quite an important concept, because CER so far is still something that those who can afford to, if you have the financial wherewithal, or those who have the ability, i.e. to live in the house, that you can have. But for those who don't have either of those things, they don't have it. And there is a value in being able to offer that service back to the system, where others can actually enjoy the benefit and get us toward net zero bus.
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's call it, please. The spontaneous nature of the roundtable will be somewhat interrupted by the need to come up. The first one was.
Where are Joe? It's straight. Oh, there's a fine.
All right. So I'm called Floyd. I'm the general manager grid, customer grid, at Endeavour Energy, and DNSP. So I will represent here the DNSP. It's always nice to come up with some provocative questions. I've been a network engineer, leader for a year. I joined, call it, in the gold plating period, or the air conditioner boom. And sort of saw how that, wasn't necessarily done right. I then witnessed what was the domestic PV boom, and how I would say networks maybe just caught up just in time to actually enable that to happen, either by choice or by consumer action. And I often then pose the question, looking forward, of, call it, the EV boom, the consumer energy resource boom, and we need to get this right? And so that's usually where I start. And I'll acknowledge, so today, 20% of energy within Endeavour Energy's network will be supplied from domestic rooftop solar. And you'll say, well, what's the market for that? There's a slight feed-in tariff that customers may or may not get. There'll also be 10% of the energy that shifted last night, and that was in domestic hot water systems. And when you look at the example of the domestic hot water system, I usually start with, that was 10% of energy that was shifted last night. It's potentially shifted into the abundant period in the middle of the day. But what was the customer value proposition in that, right? The customer value proposition was, I get hot water as my service, it's guaranteed, and I get it at a lower cost, right? And so I think the challenge we have, and we spend many times in focus groups and revealing to customers that, do you realise that 50% of dispatchable capacity will be coming from you in 2050? And they usually answer with no, and get off my battery, right? And so I think the challenge in all of this, and particularly as we start to talk about new markets and new opportunities and things like that, is really, do we actually have the customer in mind? And what is it that the customer wants and needs? And the final point is probably that not all customers are the same. And do they all need to be the same? And my answer is usually no, but I'm really quite keen to test that, because I think you can often get carried away thinking through this opportunity in the lens of, well, everybody wants an app and everybody wants to really understand and control energy. And from my experience is, should they need to?
Thank you, Colin.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Professor John Fletcher from the University of New South Wales, and I look after many of the research interests, particularly in the electrical energy space. So I deal with CSIRO, AEMO, ARENA, And I have to say, it's really good to see CSIRO putting together such a great package of kind of research and development and really driving this narrative forward. My original background was in electrical drive, so making machines do special things. And that led me into power conversion, and power conversion is really one of the key bits of technology that's driving not just the energy transition, but the electrification story itself. And on my way here, I was on a late running train, so I wrote a list of things that concern me. And when I sat and listened to CSIRO's presentation, that list got twice as big, which is great for an academic who's conducting research. I guess my first question would be, are we making it more difficult than it needs to be? And that comes from having an understanding of how our power network works in the present day and where we might end up in 2050 in terms of the dynamics of the system. And that also talks to things like the CER story. We are, as a nation, incentivizing particular types of equipment onto our network, which will do good things. We've done a great job of installing PV, particularly residential PV. As the network changes, we're probably going to have to go back to these systems and make changes to the type of equipment they use. And that also speaks to incentivizing batteries for things like peak demand reduction. Definitely going to have some benefits in the short term, but are they going to be future-proof? I suspect not. If we're thinking we're in almost 2025, by 2050, these systems will have run for a significant amount of time and probably will not have the capacity to deliver the type of responses that we need in the future. So my focus is really very much on the short time scales, kind of 10 milliseconds up to about a second, and how we might be seeing our network really responding with that much faster time scale, and all the things we're going to have to do to try and keep that type of network stable. So my first input is, are we making it too difficult for ourselves? Do we have a plan? Are there any other industries where we get away with not really having a plan of what we're going to do? That strikes me as probably my biggest fear. And it speaks to a lot about how the technology is going to have to change in order to deliver the kind of dynamic system that we want to deliver. But undoubtedly, things like ICT are going to form a really important part of the way we communicate and control in our network. So I think there are huge opportunities in ICT, and that will conclude my little input and hopefully provoke some discussion. Thank you.
All right, Lyndall, I'm just going to give you a fair warning that you are one of the few people that has natural access to a microphone, so we can hear you. So if you like, I'll give you a minute, but I'm going to ask the question of the room first, but I will come back to you. There's a couple of things that come up. Of the consumer. Consumer needs to be if we want the product. That's, at least for me, a bit of a shift from someone being able to contribute. Are we expecting too much? Is it a situation where suddenly people now must actively engage, or selecting, yes, I save some. We actually require much more active engagement from consumers.
So, fantastic questions. Most of the apps that people use to try and optimize returns will be on the phone, and we spend a lot of time on the phone already. Do we want to supplement the amount of time we spend on the phone trying to optimize what might be viewed as a relatively small sum of money. You know, when you think about the average residential bill is probably somewhere between $1,600. Seems like a lot, but it seems like a lot, but is it relative to all the other things that spend the money, and does we actually get for that bill?
Jill, you might set up.
Thanks. I guess my question is, given that we've moved banking across to digital and we manage that, and we don't save any money by managing our finances and our banking, our retail and our others, why do we think this sector, given that there is a financial incentive, will be harder than the sectors that didn't have financial incentives? And so, like, why I feel like we're putting this consumer barrier in front, and maybe the research is there to say this will be more difficult, but how much of the sector do we need on board, and which ones are ripe and ready? Certainly the households that I know that are, will be ready to contribute to that. So where do we need to start? And why do we think that this is going to be so much more difficult than the sectors that 20, 30 years ago, people said, oh no, I want to keep my post office, I want to keep my bank, I want to physically do it. So why is this different?
Yeah, absolutely agree.
So it's safe to standing up for a coffee.
Look, I agree with you. If you're as old as me, you remember the classified ads in newspapers.
Yep.
And then you remember when eBay started, and then you remember that it we started offering things that we wanted to sell on Facebook, which is a localized, just people who want to sell stuff and actually gravitate to markets to sell stuff. They know that they can sell it, they will look for a way to do it. And I think that's exactly to your point. That's the way we start. Those people who know what they want to do and can see the opportunity, we open it for them and they become the influencers that drive everyone else. As to the point about the value that we offer, I think that'll change over time. I'm always drawn back to the 4 cents a litre for petrol, which is never ever, and it's now 6 or 8 cents or 10 cents. It's never ever been about the 6 or 8, 10 cents. It's about the relative value, or the fact that you're having a win that always stands beside people. And very quickly before I sit down, Flico ran a really, really good customer engagement program in WA, where they turned off your solar for periods of time. When they did that, all the power you bought off the grid, they paid for free power, and it worked really, really well. And it was seen on their bill. On this day, this power that you bought was free, full transparency, really low value. So there's ways to the customer that we've just got to find.
Great, excellent. All right, so Lyndall, I suggested you might offer a view if you're ready.
Oh, look, absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay? Something I should check.
Yes, you're the only person we can hear clearly.
Oh no, well, I'm glad for that, at least in some small measure. So everyone, I'm Lyndall Bubke. I'm a director at the Australian. Oh no, am I gone?
You're still there, but if you could just project a little. Maybe this is opera.
I'll speak slowly. My mother tells me to enunciate to this day. So my name is Lyndall. I'm a director at the Australian Energy Regulator, and I run the Energy Innovation Toolkit. So I'm delighted to be here today. We work closely with CSIRO, particularly on the Living Labs project, which is a very exciting new development that we're watching very keenly. What we do at the Energy Innovation Toolkit is support innovation. So there's a couple of sort of broad comments I could make further to some of the discussion today. Data is a huge part of the transition. I would suggest that of the hundreds of innovators who've come our way, probably between 25 and 35% have been people in the IT industry or people who are in the data analytics industries who are looking to use their skills to actually adapt to the energy environment and the transition, and to make tailored decisions that will actually benefit the whole of network. I guess the other observation I would put forward, and it's been sort of hinted at a couple of times, the AER exists to protect consumers. What does that mean in practice? Consumers are a varied group. We've talked a bit about, should consumers do more? Should they view their energy as an asset, a product to sell? Should they be more engaged with apps? Should they be putting their batteries onto load demand response sorts of programs to earn money? The only consensus in all of the studies that have been done on what consumers want in energy is that they want options and they don't want to be pigeonholed into any one option. That means that we can't assume that consumers want to participate in this market, and nor necessarily that they should. There are many people out there whom this will benefit absolutely in no way. We can talk about networks and the costs associated with them. It's important to remember that these aren't just private companies that if they wear a loss, not my problem. Consumers pay for those companies to exist. They are natural monopolies, and that's what my agency regulates. But fundamentally, if the networks have to bear a cost, everyone has to bear a cost. I think that's a really important sort of caveat for this discussion, to remember that everyone is bearing that, and that's inclusive of pensioners who can't afford solar, single parents who can't afford batteries, and someone like myself who could afford a battery and solar and can participate meaningfully. So the way that we distribute the benefits of this system is going to be really important. That being said, there is some really exciting innovation in the way that uses data to enable consumers, and that is individuals, to participate more actively when they want to participate more actively. And there are opportunities there for those consumers to make money and to participate and to actually play an important role in the future of the energy market here and in our bid to net zero. I'm happy to take any questions too about what the service does. It's free. It's my little chance to spruik it. We give guidance on how to enter the market, and we can offer sandboxing trials too. But very excited to be here today, and there's been some really interesting discussion today.
Great. Any questions? Got one?
Yeah, hi. What I'm interested in is you talked about people not being able to participate. So we're essentially talking about the opportunity to run a micro business. But you mentioned that some people can't afford the buy-in aspect of that, which is, purchasing a battery or something. So there are social justice aspects to this. So do you think there's a need to, if you like, have some sort of social obligation or compensation as we move forward in the network, so that we don't actually end up with two tiers in our society? Those that can afford to participate and buy the basic asset to set up a micro business, and those who can't and really have difficulty accessing even a base level of this commodity, which really is an essential service.
It's a really good question, and I'm not the only person who can answer that, I'm sure. The only thing I'd say is I do believe that we should support the rights of people to simply receive energy as an essential service, as a human right, and for it to not be prohibitively expensive. It needs to be moderate. And to do that, we need to protect the rights of people to not participate in a micro business. I think I'll hand over to others to speak about incentives that the industry, as well as state governments and other agencies, are providing.
Great. So now I'm going to ask preferentially the folks sitting around our round table, if you'd like to respond to that comment or offer a view in this conversation as well. I am going to pick on standards at some point, just to be aware.
I just wonder if we consider enough, I wonder if we consider enough that consumers' primary objective is to save. And the idea of a micro business, I've got a nice coffee machine at home, but I don't have a sign out the front saying coffee. There's a few people who might drive their cars for Uber. Uber just shut down their car share business because no one wants to share the car. So we've got a lot of these assets and things going on, and wondering when we come back to trying to work out how to make the energy system better, so we'll get the cost out of it. One of the things that all these intermediaries want to do with demand response in particular is trying to work with the volatility to make money. They make money when the cost of the system increases. That means that this total system cost increases, and therefore the burden increases on all of us. Whereas having something that drives our costs, particularly around bifurcation of our energy system. So instead of being, I think, Craig, Stephen, you made a really important point about using the asset meter rather than the meter because of all the noise. So we can get to a point of having charging related just to the flexibility service, not the whole service. In doing that, that removes the baseline problem that Stephen also talked about as well. So I wonder, with the AER trying to look at this and how it works with networks, how do you see the AER's role in tariffs coming across, Linda, to refer back to you, end of the room in general, about how do we see networks being able to help consumers to save and their role in digitisation?
Just before I ask for response, we do have Slido running, and we've got someone monitoring Slido. If you're online and you want to phone up one of the questions, there's lots of questions, including coming from people in the room. That's great. If you want to upvote one of those questions, we'll tackle one of those later and get some of those questions going. So we said we would talk about consumer, the role of data and digital, and how to build trust. And we've talked about the consumer in a very, very different way today, at least that I've been involved in conversations up until now, where we have expectations, or we talk about the level of active participation or even expectation of consumers. Whereas I know for certain that in my family who just want it to work, and if they can get something on rebates, that I would be very happy with that. They really do not want to engage. But of course, if you've got the opportunity to create a micro business, that's a really interesting economic motivator for those who can respond to that. So, what would need to change about the way we think about consumers in order for us to more appropriately engage with different sorts of people, different personas, different characteristics of consumer? What would we need to do? What protections would we need to put in place? Maybe you can do a stand-up protocol and all these speakers talk that way.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hartness. I work as the founder of Project Lotus. I've been in the tech and consumer sector for the last 20 years, and I think this shift to the autonomous consumer and autonomous energy sector, where these microgrids and really almost creating like a blockchain type of environment where you're empowered as a consumer, that's what's got to shift. We are almost kind of dumbing the consumer down when in reality the consumer now drives the behaviour and has become an autonomous agent in themselves. And I think we collectively have to shift this mindset that we can curate a customer journey for people and we can create these personas, but what are we going to do to empower people, because they're going to do it on their own and they're already doing it. There's already this subgroup with, say, blockchain and, say, these coins. So I'm interested in how we're going to create marketing and education for consumers so we don't have this human rights crisis that's coming.
That's a really, really interesting question. So how do we do that? I know it's different, but Roy, I'm going to come to you soon from a slightly different perspective, maybe thinking about an economic incentive for a life perspective. I would even like to respond to that specific question, please. And if you could do the stand-up and
yes.
Broadly speaking.
My name's Hannah Heath. I'm here as an independent consultant today, but I've been in the energy industry for 20 plus years, and I've come from the perspective of working for government, working for the AMC when it first started on the rulemaking side. I've then worked for large gentailers in the market, both on the wholesale and the retail side, worked in the startup environment and more recently in the consultant space. And something that I've been thinking about, and given that this is a platform where we're kind of thinking big picture and big changes, is I feel like we're at the stage where the nature of the service that consumers receive from an energy perspective needs to shift. So we've talked about how those building blocks at the moment are, here's the energy component, here's the network component, here are the environmental schemes, here are all, the operating costs of a retailer, bundling that up and providing those services. But I'm starting to feel like maybe we need to rethink what that service actually is. And if we look at separating the service from that we're providing you power to how can you contribute to all of those other services, and there's innovation pieces. Then we have that element of a safety net where those who choose not to participate actively or are unable to participate actively have a guaranteed service and that right to make sure that you receive power. But we do it without all the complexity that currently exists, where you've got, as a retailer, 150 network tariffs that you need to match to a particular energy plan. It needs to fit in Energy Made Easy and Vic Energy Compare if you're in Victoria, to then be able to price and serve in a similar way. So I feel like we're at that turning point where the nature of the service that we're providing in energy and in electricity and the services that consumers can provide to engage and provide their own contributions means that we need to sort of step back and rethink about what it is, what service is actually being provided and the roles of the different people that are coordinating that and servicing that.
Thank you. Wonderful. Now, fair warning. I'd like to get your thoughts around curbing incentivisation, but largely energy development.
Okay. I'll stand up as well.
Turn your back on the whatever works.
Right. So Roy Green, I'm a Special Innovation Advisor at UTS and also on the board of CSIRO. I should declare that as well. And delighted to hear the introductory remarks of the two Stephens that puts the whole energy picture into the context of systems thinking, because we are thinking about a system here. It can't be treated as piecemeal. And even more broadly than this, it isn't just about a demand side issue, even though the demand side has been neglected in favour of the supply side up till now. We now have, obviously, from your discussion and the others, a better understanding of the feedback loops. But the supply side shouldn't go unnoticed in this context, especially when we start thinking about the government's approach in the Future Made in Australia plan or strategy, which is going through Parliament at the moment. This has two components, not one. It's not just net zero, it's also economic resilience in the context of a national interest framework. So what is the interdependence between these two elements of our system, between achieving net zero through energy transition, both on abundance of the supply side, and also economic resilience? If we think of this in terms of sovereign capability, how do we transform our narrow and precarious trade and industrial structure, so heavily dependent on the export of unprocessed raw materials, including fossil fuels? How do we combine the desire for a more diversified, more research-intensive, knowledge-intensive industrial structure with the shift to net zero? And that's where I think the systems thinking becomes absolutely critical. The Future Made in Australia approach is potentially mind-bogglingly complex because there's a lot of money involved here. The concept is great. How do we do the execution, which we're always so lacking in this country? We have the $22.7 billion Future Made in Australia plan as such, which is largely production credits. It also includes, if you want to go further than that, the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund, rewiring Australia, the already existing expenditures of ARENA and the CEFC, which is being added to in this context. How do all these pieces fit together when we're making such a massive transformation in our economy? I'm not going to provide an answer, but I just raised that as the challenge that we all have to solve, not by treating each piece in an isolated way, but by how they all combine together to produce the outcome that I'm sure we all want.
Right, I was just pushing out. One still standing up, I know the microphone. Is there, I mean, some of the things you talked about are really big picture whole of the economy type activities, some of them very, very forward leaning. Is there anything that you see which is fundamentally at odds between the world's the shape of Australia's being influenced by those big picture activities, and some of the things we talked about which enable consumers to more actively participate. Is there something fundamentally at odds? Is there something that we would have to highlight, or are they related, or are they completely unrelated from the perspective of surely consumers can get more actively involved with all of these big whole economy being stakeholders?
Oh, well, I think the important thing about the discussion today is that we're dealing here with a so far relatively neglected area in public policy. That is what is happening on the consumer side of the equation. So I'm an economist, not necessarily an energy expert, but I can certainly see the point in that. But I also see the point that was made by a number of the speakers. Let's make it as simple as we can, because the consumer doesn't necessarily want to spend half their day working out where can I find the cheapest energy solution and where should it come from and how do I contribute the battery in my car to achieving the most optimal outcome. If we're thinking in a systems way, there must be design solutions that can facilitate those outcomes for the consumer who doesn't want necessarily to be an active participant, but doesn't want to miss out on the bargain.
Thank you. Now, as I said, sorry, I was just going to talk into one of the questions on that. Okay, now, first of all, please keep writing us, but in terms of a standard question, like I had one, I think we've got Scott and George, you can decide for yourselves in response to this. From the world perspective of standards, we have standards like crazy for technology, standards like crazy for cybersecurity. What about these coming together to not only enable some of this wonderful functionality we've talked about, but also appropriate protections for consumers? It's a credibility question. So
just quickly, George Spinnis, Engagement Manager in the Electricity and Gas Sectors at Standards Australia. Thank you, Professor Green. I think there was great things I want to touch on there, but I want to start by, I guess, ultimately saying that standards are voluntary documents unless they are called up in legislation or regulation. And by virtue of the fact that standards are voluntary, it is hard for a body like Standards Australia to actually influence policy in areas such as consumer protection. But I think it is fundamental, and we've got standards that look at things like open data, data architecture, and I think and to a point Professor Green made about working with the federal government departments and ARENA, Australian Energy Regulator, and other bodies, I think that we are in a unique position to be able to work with a broad range of organisations across the energy landscape in Australia to develop guides on to protect consumers. One great thing about Standards Australia, I know Standards Australia, it's in our name, we do develop standards, but we are starting to develop other sort of low consensus documents like handbooks, technical specifications, and low consensus guidelines to help consumers. And we do have a close relationship with other consumer bodies across Australia, like the Consumers Federation and Choice. And I think something like this, it's such an audience that is really invested in this area, it does look like an opportunity that Standards Australia can play and can help industry in developing a document or a specifications.
Excellent. Now, before we go online, I want to make sure we've got this exciting and English Australia room. I'd like to ask quickly then, and then we'll open up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Helen Q, Australian Computer Society President, just been there for 9 months now. I like Jim's question. And I think it's like, are we making it too complicated? It's like really all the legislation, all these rules. And I just think really simple system thinking. Why don't we have like alert system or something at the front end? So we're talking about demand, we pay for it after we've used it. We have very complex ways of actually managing it before we use it. So we manage our tax system, so our tax law. I'd hate to think that this gets to look like tax laws, right? But it could do. Yeah. But we do monitor our budgets. We've got all sorts of alerts all over things. So some sort of system simple system at the front of the usage. I don't know how to build it, but that it tells you, right, you're mapping, you're trying to plan your electricity usage, and so it'll say, right, this is when you need to be doing this, that, here. Really simple, but just little things.
Maybe a little bit more like this, white question. Thanks, Ian. Thank you.
My perspective will be more of a personal one than from Energy Australia. But I like the idea of everyone is different, and you can't pigeonhole your consumer. We've spoken about that a number of times here. And obviously, simplicity will foster adoption, particularly in technology. So I was thinking to myself, well, in future, wouldn't it be nice to have, in the same way as if you want to dabble in the stock market, for instance, you can easily pick up some standard shares that have been, here are the 5 best performing shares the last 12 months ago. Or if you really want to get to the detail, you have that option, and self-managed superannuation. If we can create a market where, for those consumers who are just starting out, it's easy, tick the box, it facilitates that adoption. Everyone's got a phone these days. But then for those that do want that choice, that customization to be able to do so, I think that personalization and customization will be key as we facilitate adoption.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to start doing broader questions.
Hi, my name is Mal McEwen. I'm the founder of Combined Energy. We've implemented something in the order of 6,000 homes running advanced energy management systems, and have tripped over all the problems, have looked at all the value propositions, have tried to find markets. All the things you're saying are really top of our list of the way the system is going to evolve. I do feel, though, that there's one thing we've missed, and that is we don't have a system architecture that is scalable. This whole technology is about low-cost, equitable technology to give it to everybody. To get low-cost technology, we need to decide on a system architecture. I just imagine if your computer was managed by HP, your Foxtel was managed by Foxtel, your printer was managed by Epson, all by people running them from the cloud. Would you be happy with that you would have to send a message to your computer company to ask them to send a message to your printer? That's what we've got at the moment in energy management of the network. And we've got people managing from the cloud, we've got people managing the battery separate to their EV, separate to their water heater. It's a house of cards. Unless this industry, and I've been in the IT industry in telecommunications for 20 years, and then I've moved here for the last 10 years in energy, and I'm staggered at how that there's this hole in the middle, because we've got a whole lot of analog regulators who've been doing a great job in that world for 50 years, and we're going to a digital world, and we've missed the core problem, which is there's no consistent infrastructure. We can't build product, we can't cost down product until we know what we're all building. And this is missing at the moment. We missed an opportunity with the NBN to include that as a core piece of our energy infrastructure. Home routers should have energy management built into them, in 5 years' time. And unless we get this, we're going to be a boutique solution. It's not going to scale, and we're not going to be able to participate in any of these markets. Our company, we struggle from day to day trying to integrate systems in a home where we've got vendors who've got closed APIs, huge marketing budgets, influencing government, DNSPs, retailers in Australia, stopping really good engineering happening, really good system innovation happening. We're doing world-leading technology here, and we can't export it because it's built on a whole lot of hodgepodge systems, etc. We've got metering systems, smart meters that are the dumbest things in the world. Sorry if I'm ranting here, but we've missed the real problem. It's getting this sorted. Let's get some good foundations so we can build all these markets and systems. If we don't solve this problem, and it's been around we've been lobbying regulators for 5 years now. It's a small company. We've run out of money. We're running out of time to do this anymore. And unless this industry sorts that out, you're not going to have an industry.
So just building on that, if you've just talked about the system side of things, the tech side of things, that's actually the same that's happening on the policy side of things. So when people enter into the Australian market, they think they're entering one market in the den, but it's not one market. AEMO has a set of rules, and there's a set of rules for retail as well, but each jurisdiction has their own requirements as well. And so when we talk about, which rules we need to change or what framework or the incentives, it's not just one set. The fact that, every state and territory in Australia has got environmental targets, but each one of them is set in their own legislation with a slightly different target. There are energy efficiency schemes, there are peak demand reduction schemes. Everyone is different in each state. And so you've got the system diversity and nothing actually talks to one another. And then each distribution network has their own structure of tariffs, has their own timeframes as to what's peak, off-peak, shoulder. All of those things are relevant because the sun shines differently. Daylight savings is different, but it's not just one fix. There are going to be we need to think about how we actually bring the policy, the regulation, the technology all together. So we're actually solving a set of problems to bring that commonality and get that scalability.
Open standards and interoperability are going to create competition in markets. At the moment, there's a lot of people lobbying for their position in the energy industry because they've been historically there, or they're really big global companies who can lobby harder and are better at it than small startups. And we're not getting the innovation. We're not getting, it's well known. Governments still keep having programs out there subsidising equipment, and they let these systems propagate. They don't demand openness standards. It's the only way we're going to evolve.
I'm going to ask Stephen Craig to offer a response.
Yeah, so you just described the same shock that I felt when I came into the energy sector from being in systems engineering and other sectors, including telecommunications for many years. This is starting to happen, but it's very late, to be honest. So together with AEMO, we run a global power system transformation research effort. There is an architecture stream there that is very focused on bringing that modern systems architecture to this problem. I know in the future energy systems area at AEMO, they're now working in a modern systems architecture, systems engineering way with CER, functional requirements, and so on. But it's very late. It's also starting to happen perhaps a little bit ahead of us in other markets, in Europe, in the UK, and the US. But I agree completely, it is starting to happen, and I think there's increasing recognition that it is a major gap. Indeed, it's the reason we proposed the Smart Energy Initiative to start. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. So one of the interesting things, of course, about the CSIRO mission is it's all about innovation, and the opportunity to innovate is to some very large extent driven by access to data. And even if you don't have full system architecture, but at least you've got the data that comes to different parts of it. And there's lots of things that we can potentially do with it. But it's a good point, and it's one that it does keep coming up. Tim, we have a question for you.
So you have Claire as the most upvoted question. She's asked, how can we make the energy transition fair for people living in apartments or renting, or who can't buy solar systems?
Great question.
I'd like to ask the Stevens guys to think about where standards might come into that.
Just happy with that point. But why don't we get a response with it?
This is partly system thinking, but also to your point before. A lot of policy or innovation, a lot of discussion so far about CER focuses on the individuals who can do it. I think when it comes to energy policy, energy system architecture, we do, I think, as a collective, need to look at the system as a whole, not individual or chunks of the system. All the policy discussion, all the innovation, all the work so far, it's about addressing only one small part of the system at the exclusion of others. Until we start looking at the whole system, all the components and all the participants, all the people in it, we won't be able to address the issues. They are often forgotten. I guess they're often the ones who don't make it worse.
Yeah. Yes, the awkward standing.
Yeah. But it's like, I think it's interesting, the conversation, because I think we balance between going really complex and starting to talk about interoperability and things, and beat ourselves up right as an industry, right? And I often do it myself. And then when you look at the stats, you say, well, actually, Australia has world-leading, call it domestic solar uptake, right? Like, and it's often looked at across the world, and yet we've somehow managed to do that in a fairly analog system, right? So there's just these, really fascinating data points. And I think there was a point earlier, even around, sort of feed-in tariffs, and this is probably where I'll start to talk about language, right? Because I think, and I think one of the biggest challenges in the industry is actually language. So I introduced, I'll say personally, the export tariffs, right? So let's charge customers for exporting solar onto the grid, right? So a very controversial topic, right? But it was actually one that was driven around pricing equity, right? And actually it was one driven by customers, for customers, around pricing equity. So then when you get into the language is it's a solar tax, it's a sun tax. And sort of yesterday we read an article around minimum demand, but that probably just meant minimum operational demand on a network, probably just means maximum customer participation on a network, right? And so I actually wonder, like, we sort of gravitate here between these complex topics, but at the same time start to realise very quickly that customers are leading this way. There's almost a question of how, are we missing a point here of actually how are we actually engaging them and understanding what they want and how they want to behave to actually drive some of this decision making.
Great. As with all great conversations, it's getting better and better as we get towards the finish line. It's a messy process, and I am fairly keen that we can finish on time.
Just my name's Bob Rosengreen, and I'm a consumer of lots of things. And I try bananas, they stay for a rig around $4, right? Price of electricity has been up and down a long way over the last few years, and it's very difficult. So from the consumer's point of view, what does he want? He wants a fair price. What's a fair price for electricity? How do you know that? Let's have a look around. Fair price. I get solar and I get 5 cents for supplying solar, but I get charged 28 cents when I use it, right? So people can just see those two numbers and they say, hang on a minute, I'm getting 5 cents and you're charging someone else 28 cents for the same power I'm giving you. So I think, how do they find out what their price is? They ask someone, they say, how much is your electricity bill, Mary? Jim, what are you paying? You've got solar. How much do you pay a month? That's what they find out, and that's what they know, and they are talking, and they find their own measure of what's fair. The federal government jumps in and says, makes it a political issue. Hey, they promised you $28 or $280 discount on your electricity bill, and they're not delivering it. Fair price, that's all they want, and they want to be understanding that we don't want to get into an Enron situation where we give it to free enterprise in a way that causes a big problem. Anyway, fair price for everyone.
Thank you. That's terrific. Thanks. We are going to have to get to the end. So from our roundtable, I saw David and Shabin.
We just heard that consumers are leading the way, which is great. Obviously, there's lots of other stakeholders involved. I may answer my question here, but in terms of creating the missing systems required, I think Malcolm got to this point. We've heard the words competition, lobbying, position today. That, to some extent, undermine the notion of trust and transparency for data, which is absolutely needed to collaborate and get the things done that we've been talking about. So is there a bit of an issue with trust, privacy, transparency that we need to overcome in order to get better and quicker?
Good. And trust is one of the fundamental issues we're going to talk about, but I'm sorry to make this a lot of time.
Sure. I'll be super quick, I guess. I guess the two words that come to mind when we're talking about this, so I live in an apartment, but actually the only people I know who manage their energy through an app are people who live in apartments, and they're part of a group buying situation for their apartment that was set up when that apartment was built. Yeah. And so they are saving money and tracking their electricity against their other tenants in their building, and it is saving them money. I mean, the one thing that probably brings us all together is we do all want to save money. Yeah. I think so. When it comes to consumers, we know that that is something that everybody shares the same. So that community aspect and how we work together as a community to to reach these goals. And then the other thing I would say is it's like Roy says, it's about that systems thinking. What are the steps to get to this? So one thing that I work in is waste. And so it doesn't seem to matter if you go away for 6 weeks on a holiday and you come back, you get the same bill as you did when you were in the apartment for 6 weeks, right? Well, how is that working? Because I have not used anything for 6 weeks. So, and I turned everything off, I try to be good. I want to achieve net zero targets. And I think people of my generation very much do and are willing to put some time in. But that time versus, that needs to be sort of managed as part of it. But, how can we help people to actually save the use of energy before we're building all these systems and creating things? So, because I'd be very happy to turn things off if I did see that change in cost.
Laura from the New South Wales Smart Energy Network.
Yeah, sorry, Laura from the Smart Energy Network.
Okay, we're really going to have to wrap up. Very. Oh, sorry, Lyndall, please.
Oh, no, just a really quick comment on exactly that. I think that's where these options that the private industry and the innovators and people who are getting good at data, these are the kind of solutions that are being generated, and they're targeting this exact problem. Most of the innovators who come through our service are trying to cater to the needs of underserved markets, like people in apartments who can't access solar or for whom a battery is infeasible for whatever reason. There are so many options out there that are being brainstormed, and that's the kind of area where regulation is trying to be responsive and needs to be increasingly responsive to those new kinds of models that will extend the benefit of the transition to those underserved markets. And I think that's where there's so much value that this innovative area can add through aggregation, through apps that track, and through more efficient technology that people can access. Really exciting stuff there.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. Phil, we're on time. And in fact, we're over time. So unsatisfied people will have to talk to each other at this end. I am going to say thank you very much and hand over to Stephen to take it out and then Wayne to say what's today. So thank you very much for that. Just so you know what's going to happen next. Notes get distilled, feed into the next conversation. This fairly messy, abrupt ending to the conversation is the beginning of the next messy conversation, which leads to the next messy conversation. Until we get some good advice that we can offer to people who are trying to do things right or better regulation. I'm going to see that.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everyone. Fantastic conversation. I'll be very, very brief. As Ian and Wayne mentioned, start of a series. Thank you to Pearcey Foundation for initiating Australia 4.0. Excellent initiative, very well aligned with our smart energy work. I did mention the National Energy Mission briefly. It is intended to be a collaborative centre for the nation. So if any of this living lab or systems science methodology can reach out to me, it's not just for CSIRO. So CSIRO is for everyone. And with that, thank you, and I think it's
One final word. I see Phil's been wanting to ask a question. We'll talk after this, but I want to say that this is the first of hopefully 7 or 8 sessions. The next one is on October the 2nd in Canberra with Engineers Australia, talking about skills and resources that we need to address this and what we're doing to address that challenge. The following at end of October, we're working with Race to 2030 and Monash University and whatever, and with Neil. Horrocks is here and represents the Race to 2030. And just like to say that this didn't drop out of the sky, today's meeting. There is a committee that's driving this, of which Ian is the chair, and I happen to sit on the committee, but I'm the chairman of the foundation, but Ian's running this initiative. And the other members of the committee include Tim Ryan, who's sitting there, and a couple of guys that have been watching on the Zoom session, Colin Farrelly in Melbourne and Jordan Green, who are driving these sessions. You know, we meet weekly. Hopefully it made sense, but it's a lot of organisation, but we're all very committed, as you are, for turning up today. We have a real issue. The ICT industry has a real role to play in here, and data is very, very important. And thanks very much for your remarks, Helen, from the Australian Computer Society, because we need this collaboration. This is a national challenge and initiative, and we need to collaborate far better than we normally do. Thank you.